I didn't get a chance to talk about, I mean, it sounds, you're probably all thinking that Richard just does the Akeidah over and over and over and over again for 40 years, 40 days, 40 nights, 40, 40 important number. Actually, he has a kind of wide range, but I'm a very wide range and very concentrated because it's all biblical. Pretty much.
Yes. All my painting is biblical. I mean, occasionally I've done a few country landscapes.
Yeah.
But no.
But what I'm interested in, is there any other narrative that comes close to obsessing you like this one?
Well, okay, yes. I did 2 series. I've got a group of people coming to my studio on Monday, and I'm going to be showing them these 2 series of paintings, which I actually haven't worked on the narratives for a couple of years, but I desperately want to get back into it. Early on in this whole process, I was very interested in narratives having to do with women and sexuality. And in fact, I've now developed a theory. I believe that the women in my main focus is Torah. The women in the Torah, aside from being not really focused on enough, but frequently the role they play is they are the narrative engines. They are the engines that make things go, meaning they move the narrative forward, and they usually do so in enormously generative means and frequently through sexuality. The biggest and easiest example is, and I did an entire series of paintings on this, and that is the Daughter's Lot. So I did a set of smallish paintings of about 6 paintings looking at Lot's daughters. And where there's a couple of midrashim, who they were, and what happens with them in Sodom, and of course, then they sleep with their father, right? Lot's daughters, right? That painting I did first a standalone painting, but then part of that series. I'm very proud of the title of that painting, in which they're committing incest. It's called Hop on Pop. So sorry, can't help myself. But the punchline. What's the punchline of incest? What's the punchline of Lot's daughters? Well, wait a minute. Isn't it who is the ancestor of Ruth? Moab, the Moabites, right? Moab was one of the 2 sons, right? Wait a minute. Who's Ruth? Ruth is the great-grandmother or the great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech. So out of incest, what do you get narratively? The Mashiach. Okay, the anointed king of Israel, i.e. David, or the final Messiah. Wait a minute, that's not expected. Whoa! Hey, I'm not making anything up here. This is not my imagination. This is not like a perverted 21st century old man. No, this is in our holy text. So now I'm onto something. So I'm going to tell you that these narratives, and I started out with Lot's daughters, but the 2 that I'm going to be showing these people, and the 2 that I want to really get back into with a heightened degree of sense of being a feminist, is the 2 parallel narratives of Judah and Tamar and Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Now, okay, Judah and Tamar, it should scream to you, that's the other half of David's ancestry. Wow. And wait a minute, what's that? That's a daughter-in-law seducing her father-in-law? Whole set of painting on that, because it's fascinating. But all these paintings are probably now about 10 years old. But I want to get back into them and really start to examine the narrative, look at the midrashim, really try to understand it, because it's going somewhere very, very important, right? Tamar gives birth, I think, to Peretz, and Peretz is one of the lines that goes into David. Judah and Tamar, which is an amazing story. But then the parallel narrative is right next to one another in the Torah, right? Is Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Well, Joseph and Potiphar's wife, oh my God, it was so. I've given lectures on this. Don't throw anything at me. The lecture I gave on this a couple of times is called Uppity Women, because that's what Mrs. Potiphar is. But we all think of her on the surface as this cloying, almost mother-in-law type, can't keep her hands off of this handsome Joseph. Well, okay, first of all, interesting enough, the rabbis say, well, okay, but why did she do this? She had a dream. What was a dream? She had a role to play in that family. It wasn't just her sexuality she's interested in. No, she thinks she's got something important to do. Okay, that's one side of the two of them. What's the other side? Well, there's Joseph. You know what Joseph is called? Joseph is called Joseph HaTzadik, right? Why is he Joseph HaTzadik? If you look carefully at the Midrashim, it's because he was he was so close to having sex with Mrs. Potiphar that he was literally on top of her, right? You won't hear that in Hebrew school, but in fact, the Midrashim are very, very clear, and they are so explicit, it's almost pornographic. So his righteousness is based upon his, in fact, youthful lust that he is able, only by the skin of his teeth, pardon the expression, to not act on. So that's rather interesting in and of itself. So we have Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar, and I do a whole series of paintings on that. But there's a whole other thing that I discovered. And this is, when you ask me about things that I'm interested in, this I think I've kind of done a little bit more recently, and that is this interesting woman. Let's see, I hope I can get her name now. Asnat. Who's Asnat? Asnat is, Asnat, if you'll remember, is Joseph's wife. Asnat is given to Joseph by Potiphar. Now, of course, the Midrashim, the rabbis say, wait a minute, Joseph, the righteous Jew, he's going to take some, non-Jewish woman as a wife, and just because Pharaoh, right? And remember, what does Asnat do? Asnat gives birth to the two Manasseh and Ephraim, right? Okay, so what do the Midrashim do? The Midrashim say, no, we know who Asnat is. Asnat. So we're going to go back to Dinah. We're going to go back to when Dinah goes out in Shechem, right? She goes out checking out the neighborhood. She gets herself raped by Shechem, right? Terrible tragedies, absolutely awful, right? Well, you can't get raped in the Bible without having a child. It's like, sex in the Bible immediately results in offspring. The rabbis want to know what happens to that offspring. There's this little girl that's born. And so she's born. But what are the brothers? The brothers, the sons of Jacob, they want to kill this child because that child is evidence of the disgrace of their sister, right, Dinah? So Jacob says, no, you're not going to kill this little girl. We're going to put a sign on her, a little medal around her neck, and we're going to send her away. An angel takes her down, where? Down to Egypt. And she is adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar. Out of Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar, Mrs. Potiphar, who was convinced she had a role to play in this family, lo and behold, she is, quote, the stepmother. She's the mother of the adopted child, Asnat, who ends up being Joseph's wife. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It is so amazing because this all has to do again with the role of women and indeed the role of sexuality in the Torah narrative. So these are things that I'm working on now, or that I've worked on, and now I want to re-enter into it with a heightened feminist consciousness of trying to understand it even better. I've already done the series on this, quote, the story of Asnat, just so you don't think I'm totally crazy. So think in terms of your art history. Rembrandt, there is a famous painting of Rembrandt of what's called the cross blessing. Okay, right? You got Rembrandt sitting. Got Jacob sitting there, old Jacob, right? He's got his hands crossed, and the two boys are his feet. There's a woman standing there. Who's that? That's Asnat. That's the mother of the two of them. She's not in the text. Rembrandt heard it. Rembrandt knew it. He knew the Midrash, that's who she is, and she's standing there, the wife of Joseph. That's Asnat. So these kinds of connections are what really make me very, very excited and happy to be doing these things. And also, to me, I think they're relevant. I mean, I want to see, women's participation in active in Judaism. The women's role should be, I was about to say no different than men's. I'm an Orthodox Jew. Obviously, I think there are distinctions, but I'm more for blurring those distinctions than not. And certainly in terms of giving credit where credit is due in terms of their role in our Torah.